Good evening. I'm Kim Newman, and I manage public programs at the Cooper Union. Thank you all for joining us. It is so wonderful to be continuing this collaborative series of Public Art Fund virtual talks at Cooper. Tonight's conversation is our second virtual panel organized around global positioning, a multi-city public art fund exhibition presenting new artworks by 20 artists from 17 countries. The works in this exhibition urge us to carefully examine shared vulnerabilities, painful divisions, and possibilities for coming together across a world reshaped by COVID-19, ongoing conflict, and the growing crisis of climate breakdown. Global positioning also explores the role of public art in reconnecting us with one another. So I'm thrilled to be here with all of you to celebrate two of the exhibition's featured artists. I'm grateful for Cooper's continued partnership with Public Art Fund, an organization that truly shares with us a commitment in making art and culture accessible to everyone. My deep thanks to them. Since I'm joining you from New York, I think it is important to acknowledge that the Cooper Union is located on the ancestral Lenape homeland. I invite us to offer our respect and recognition for past and present First Nation, Native American, and Indigenous communities. It is my pleasure to welcome tonight's featured artists, Sean Connelly and Rosana Paulino. Thank you very much for being here. We also have the pleasure of being joined by Katerina Stathopoulou, Associate Curator of Public Art Fund. Katerina will say a little more about Sean and Rosana and will be moderating this evening's talk. And with that, thank you all again, and I'll hand things over to Katerina.
Thank you, Kim, for that warm introduction. We have closed captioning available for us tonight, and please, we encourage everyone to submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We're very honored to have Rosana and Sean here with us tonight. I would like to acknowledge the wonderful supporters of Public Art Fund Talks. Our aim with our talks is really to connect compelling contemporary artists with the broad public and to establish a dialogue about artistic practice and public art. And this wouldn't be possible without our supporters, Con Edison, the New York State Council of the Arts, New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, Public Art Fund's wonderful board. And we're also very grateful for the donors who supported global positioning the exhibition we'll be discussing tonight, including our presenting partners, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and our incredible partners at JCDecaux who provided the bus shelters on which the artwork is exhibited. I also want to acknowledge my wonderful co-curators, Nicholas Bohm, who's the Artistic and Executive Director at Public Art Fund, and Daniel Palmer, our adjunct curator. It was a true pleasure to work with them on the exhibition. And of course, we had a phenomenal group of nominators who helped propose artists for the exhibition and helped us with the selection process, which was really instrumental for this exhibition and really opened our eyes and our horizons to new artists and regions. So thank you to all our nominators as well. We're joined tonight by Sean Connelly and Rosana Paulino to discuss their work in the current exhibition. And we're really thrilled to have them. You know, this is one of the things that the pandemic has enabled us, is to make these virtual connections and virtual events throughout the world. So different time zones, but we're very happy that they're joining us tonight. Global Positioning is an exhibition that includes 20 international artists that have created works on 320 JCDecaux bus shelters. And the exhibition is presented in 3 cities, New York, Chicago, and Boston. For this exhibition, we invited the artists to respond in direct and indirect ways to the effects of the pandemic and to think about how we are understanding our reshaped lives and world as we start to come out of the pandemic and we start the recovering process. It's also important to acknowledge that different regions and different areas in the world have experienced the last 2 years in vastly different ways. It's not the same in New York as it is in Honolulu right now, or in São Paulo, where Paulina is, with Rosana is, apologies. And that is something that is, we thought of a lot in the exhibition, and we wanted to highlight by having voices from different corners of the world. The artists are from 17 different countries, spanning from the Amazon rainforest in Colombia to Central Australia to Myanmar. So we really have a richness of voices in this exhibition. And we really try to embrace the global community and provide points of cultural reconnection in the world beyond our borders. So at this point, I would love to show a 2-minute clip of the exhibition, especially for our audience that's not in New York, because I think it really gives a sense of the energy and the pulse of the artwork within the cities they're presented in.
Global positioning is such a great opportunity to bring art outside of the walls of museums and galleries and into the daily lives of people. And hopefully that will allow for more personal and tender or contemplative, organic and honest interactions with art.
Global Positioning is a new exhibition featuring 20 artists from 17 countries around the world, presented on 320 JCDecaux bus shelters in New York City, Boston, and Chicago.
The exhibition really is about bringing together all of these global voices from artists across 6 continents, spanning disparate regions of the world, including Africa, the Middle East, Oceania, the Americas, and South and East Asia.
We were able to start meaningful conversations, understand cultural differences, understand the socio-political environments in which artists were working.
We really encouraged the artists to create work that responded to this moment, artwork that shared their realities, their experiences of the COVID-19 pandemic, and of other issues that they were confronting in their own daily lives and felt were urgent in their own cultures.
Some artists work in collage, others in photography, painting, drawing, even embroidery. Many artists have incorporated elements from the environments in which they live and work. You can see elements of each artist, their nationality, their personal identity, their drive to connect with the public in their individual artworks.
I would like to now introduce Sean Connelly, who's an artist, design theorist, and architectural historian based in Honolulu. Their work includes new media, land art, film, cartography, building design, data analysis, social practice, and more. Connelly works to repair the impacts of settler colonialism, militarization, and climate change today. Sean, welcome.
Aloha. Aloha mai kako, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen here. I'm zooming to you from Honolulu, Hawaii, which is the world's most isolated landmass. And so it's a pleasure to be included in this exhibition in such great cities so far from me. And to be included in this panel with amazing artists and amazing curators. So thank you for the opportunity and thank you to the audience. This is the image of the work that I had submitted for global positioning, as well as my handles. You can follow me at Sean W. Connelly and After Oceanic on Instagram. And the work I do as an artist is, you know, a lot about the context, and it's a lot about history and my home here. And so what I'm going to share over the next 5 minutes are some examples of work, but also hopefully some information about maybe a place that many people don't know about. Hawaii is Kanaka Maoli land, native Hawaiian land that is illegally occupied by the United States. For Americans, many people think about Hawaii as the 50th state, but there's a very long history that is often overlooked. And for the most part, the United States and the concept of American often purposefully excludes us out here in Hawaii. This is a video that I produced in 2014 called 40,000 BCE, and it's a speculative cartographic mapping of canoe migrations by oceanic peoples. Many people are familiar that humans migrated across land, but humans also migrated across the sea for tens of thousands of years. And that's, as somebody who identifies as a Pacific Islander, our sort of legacy has to do with this deep connection to the ocean and all the things that go into being able to navigate such far distances without the use of a compass or metal instruments. In terms of the production of this map, I used bird data because in the oral history, navigators often had relationships with non-human elements like birds that would help provide orientation and direction across the ocean. And so one thing that we can all remember is that somewhere in our histories, we're all connected by the sea. The ocean is very powerful. It connects everything on the planet. And so the ocean provides a unique lens on how to understand land. And so this idea of the ocean as a center of an island is a new way of reframing how we think about ourselves living on land. Native Americans also describe North America as Turtle Island. It's not just a continent. We are all part of islands, and Pacific Islanders, when they arrived to these new islands and built relationships with these islands, they developed very sophisticated systems of resource management that enabled generations, upwards of a million people, to survive on these remote islands without necessarily completely destroying their environment. So these are some adapted images of a very famous poster by Marilyn Kahalawai that illustrates the concept of the Hawaiian Ahupa'a system, which is a land division that extends from mountain to ocean. These kinds of concepts about the ocean and land and history have been very influential in my work, which has also always been about the future and finding ways to communicate that future. It's very important because in terms of the illegal occupation of the United States in Hawaii, Hawaii is a very, very heavily militarized environment. And right now, our biggest threat to our future is the leaking Red Hill fuel tanks that were built in top secret during World War II and are still in operation today. The facilities built underground, 100 feet above our aquifer, 20 steel tanks filled with jet fuel, over 250 million gallons of jet fuel that is leaking into our freshwater aquifer system. And so it's a big conflict between the local population, our health, our future, and these the US military, the US Navy, and their sort of negligence in protecting our water supply. To the US Navy, our island is not just a military base, it's a place where we live. And Hawaii is very strategic for the United States because military, 52% of the world's United States military operations are headquartered here in Hawaii. And this fuel is supposed to be able to respond, allow the military to respond. And so it's a sort of a really big issue that not many Americans are aware of. And so my work is sort of looking at all these different aspects, thinking of ways. This is a social justice land art project where I'm proposing to reinstall native Hawaiian fish ponds and kaula fields in the heart of our tourist district around the Alawai Canal. This has sort of been an ongoing project of mine. And then also as a sculptor, taking these kind of concepts and actually working in material. And there's an article about my sculpture here, A Small Area of Land, that discusses the work as expanding the notion of land beyond a material or merely site-specific interest for artists into something that additionally includes more explicit references to structural systems of dispossession, exploitation, theft, and lasting injustices. And so part of the question here is, I'm really encouraging people to be really critical and thinking about what is their relationship to land. Land is not something that we can buy or sell. Land is something that is familial, where we are related to land and we are connected to land. And as I conclude, taking the sculpture work into deeper into material systems and finding ways to utilize art practice as a way to dismantle concepts of our built environment, that maybe contribute to its destruction in favor of indigenous techniques like the use of lolu palm thatching, which is an indigenous building material here in Hawaii on the right, and the use of canoe lashing adapted for an architectural purpose in the sculpture 16 Cube Truss on the left. Really using the art practice as a way to help the community reimagine the built environment and the kind of future that we can have if we make these sort of shifts. Material is really important because material is a way that we also access resources and connect to our environment and the communities that grow the resources, harvest them, and take care of the knowledge required to do so. And lastly, that brings me back to the work for the Public Art Fund. What I decided to do is I decided as a sculptor, I was like, how can I share my work in this format? And so what I did was I used it as an opportunity to take a unique vantage point within the sculpture. And I used it as a chance to sort of send the message to the United States that the ocean is the center of an island. I was excited to be able to present something that some people may have never seen before, which is the close-up detailing of this beautiful lashing. Yeah, I'm at my time limit and I'm super excited to continue our conversation in the Q&A. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Sean. That's fascinating. I would like to welcome Rosana now, who is a São Paulo-based artist whose work addresses Afro-Brazilian experience, focusing on Black women in Brazilian society through drawing, installation, sculpture, and weaving. Her work centers around social, ethnic, and gender issues and the various types of violence suffered by populations due to racism and the lasting legacy of slavery. So I would like Rosana to please take the floor now.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to stay here and discuss about my work to Global Positioning Project. And I would like to say that in this case, when I received the invitation to take part of the program, I had to face two challenges because normally I don't work with public art. I work with paper, I work with small shapes. I like to use small images. I work a lot of printmaking, for example, or drawing. So I had to think about this process, about, first of all, about the way that I work, and second, what kind of image would be interesting for a project like this one. At the same time, in Brazil, we had an event that was very violent against the nature. We had a lot of fires in the country, in the forests. And I was completely shocked with the thing that was occurring in the country, with this violence against the forest, against the nature. And at the same time, the world was facing the pandemic. And there is no doubt about the fact that the pandemic is directed, linked with the destruction of the environment, the destruction about nature. So I started to think about this, and I started a series of collages and drawings like this one that you are seeing now, that is called in Portuguese, pata de vaca. That's something like a cow paw, something like this. I don't know, I'm not sure about the translation. But the idea was to work with this leaf that you see inside at the center of the work, that the leaf of a tree that has this shape like a cow paw. And the idea that in Brazil, we are putting down the forests to have the cattle there, and then to sell meat for the world. This is something very violent. This is something that is killing people, that is destroying the environment, that we Brazilians, we just can't fight alone against this. If people buy, for example, the meat, it is very difficult for us to to fight against this. I read a newspaper note that the last fire in in an environment in Brazil that's called the Pantanal, that's a very specific area that have together a lot of water and forest, killed amount 4 billions of insects, for example, and for the small animals. That is too much. And I waste some nights without sleep. That was not possible to sleep after reading this. At the same moment that I was thinking about this, I received the invitation to take part of the program. So I was doing this kind of artwork, and I prepared my work for the bus shelter, thinking about this impact of the nature and the things that was occurring in Brazil, and at the same time it was affecting all the world. Next, please. So I developed this work that's called the Dangerous Game, that I believe would be very interesting to put in a bus shelter, because I believe that we human beings, we are playing a very, very dangerous game. We know now that the human being can disappear. And for me, it's something really awful how we don't put attention on this fact. We are just carry on our lives like everything was normal. That's not normal. We are facing the threat to disappear like a species. So to kill the environment, to kill the animals, and to put down the forest, it is can kill the species, the human being, and then nobody like to put much attention on this fact. So I developed this. We can go next, please. That you can see here the image in the bus shelter. I think it's to deal with these images of nature. That's not something that normally I use in my work, but I was so affected when I received the invitation that I really would like to produce something to call attention for the fact that we are facing a pandemic, but people don't be aware that this is directed, linked with nature, with our position in the way that we deal with nature. In this case, I just changed my subject to do this artwork. And I really think that we have to put much more attention on things that are occurring now in the nature. So I think that I have 5 minutes. I think that is okay. But the main idea here is to call attention that the pandemic and the way that we are dealing with ourselves, with nature, is something that can really make the human being disappear. And it's time to put much more attention and make really international effort to discuss this kind of issue. If I can give some ideas, or if I can put this issue on the table to be discussed, I have my own way to do this is using art. So to put this kind of project in a bus shelter, for me, was very, very interesting. And I thought that was the best way that I have to contribute with this question. Hey, thank you.
Thank you, Rosana and Sean, for your very interesting and intriguing presentations. There's a lot to unpack in what we just heard. I think one thing that both of your practices share is that they're both research-based. You both focus on social, ecological, political issues, histories of colonialism, past and present. And I think something that stands out in both your practices is the intent to educate the viewer. At least that's how I interpret it. Let's start with, to educate the audience and also to raise awareness about issues that are timely and very important. Is that a correct interpretation of your practices?
Yes, I think so. I think that's much more than educated. Is to call attention for the problem. I don't think I have this power to educate people, but I think that I can put, and it's very important to put the problem on the table. Okay, look at this. We have to deal with this. It's about survival. That's one thing that we really must put more attention. That's not a joke. That's not something to play. That's very serious. And the idea was not about education, but to put the problem on the table to discuss it.
Yeah, I think, Hawaii's, as I said earlier, it's generally Hawaii history in the context of the United States is overlooked. And people who are born and raised here sort of have this history embedded in their sort of worldview. Even locally, to an extent, there are some, like the older generations don't know a lot about the military and compared to the younger generations. And so we have a lot of, there's a very strong community of artists and scholars here over the past, 40, 50, 60 years that have really dedicated their lives so that our generations and the generations coming forward can, do decolonial work in this sort of, like, for example, my niece and nephew are the first in their family to grow up speaking Native Hawaiian as a first language. So in terms of education, I think part of it is also just making the learning process public, making opportunities for people to learn. And yeah, I really sort of emphasize the importance of local people in Hawaii who have been doing this kind of work for a long time. Compared to more recently, a lot of there has been a little bit more of a growing interest in Hawaii. The pandemic kind of actually brought in a whole new wave of like a kind of like a pandemic tourist who would come out here and do their sort of quarantine or work from home out in the tropics. And it really does put a strain on our environment. So yeah, the reason why the educating with the work and making learning public is that like our lives and our environment are at stake. Yeah.
And that's very well said. Both of you also have very multifaceted practices, ranging from sculpture to works on paper. And both of you in your practices and specifically in global positioning address very timely issues such as deforestation, wildfires, pollution, the importance of water in today's society. I would say bus shelters are quite a unique public space to be presenting your work. And this exhibition, as we know, is in 3 cities, 320 different platforms. And these are spaces that are traditionally used for advertising and for conveying advertising messages. Can you talk a bit about the experience of working specifically on bus shelters or in public art in general?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh,
either one. Rosana.
I can go ahead.
Please, Sean.
We can take turns going first. Yeah, for me, it was exciting because the place is super important in my work. And so Chicago, New York, Boston, these are like major American cities. It's like, they're like the bellies of the beast in terms of the sort of history of the United States and capitalism. And, for example, in Boston, the first missionaries that came to Hawaii came from Boston. And so I think that the place is really important. And then the context of advertising, I thought it was interesting way to give access to opportunities to see this sort of work and to sort of appropriate the concept of advertising to promote something that's not necessarily the typical advertisement, which has to do with sales and it's linked to capitalism, but maybe something about a conceptual issue in a place and climate change, demilitarization, futurism, all these kinds of things. But yeah, I'm excited to hear what Rosana has to say.
Well, in my case, it's very difficult for me to work with a large size, large formats. I work on paper. My training as artist is like a printmaker, sorry. So it's very difficult, for example, to think about a sculpture in an open space. So what kind of work would be interesting to discuss issue like this one, an issue that interests a lot of people. So to put this art in a bus shelter, for example, it's very interesting because I can reach a large audience. That's easier for me to think to make a work, an artwork as I made mine. That was a size that was prepared to think to enlarge this in a bus shelter. So it allowed me to work in my way, in the way that I used to do, and that I feel very comfortable to deal. And also it could be easier to think about this artwork and after enlarge this. And so I think that some experience, like to put an artwork on a bus shelter or to use the internet, for example, it's very valuable because the artwork can, it is spread. I saw another day, for example, a photo, a person just marked me in the Instagram, a person that I've never seen. I don't know who is this person, and took a picture about my artwork and send it to me. That, oh, look at this. I saw this and I like this. I think that is very important. And I look for more information about you and about your work. And then took the photo and I sent it to you. So it's very interesting because we can really enlarge, we can really spread this discussion. So I think that to put an artwork on a bus shelter, it's really works for me. It's very interesting. It's like to use the internet, and I think that the artists have to learn how to deal with this kind of different media. If you will put our artworks just inside the museums, it is very interesting. But I think the time now, it's so urgent. We have so many things to discuss. And that's so urgent that we have to learn how to deal with this kind of different media to spread this kind of discussion.
Thank you for that, Rosana. And to build off of what you're saying, I think it's really interesting that during the pandemic, we've all learned to work remotely and virtually. And I think it's important to mention that the three of us have never met in person. We did the whole exhibition virtually. We did Zoom sessions to talk about the concept of the exhibition, to understand what your intent was in the works you were creating. Rosana, I know you haven't had the opportunity to visit your works in New York, Chicago, or Boston. Sean, I know you recently saw your work in New York. But it's just, I think, partially because of the pandemic, but partially because of the age we're living in, exhibitions and art exists in the physical locations, but also virtually. One can experience the full exhibition on our website. We have interactive maps for the 3 cities where you know exactly where to find all the work. So even if you haven't been there, you can actually experience it through the website and also, you know, the videos and all of the supporting material for the exhibition. So I wanted to ask how these past years have affected the way you've been working. And, you know, there are definitely some benefits, the way the world is more connected, but also, of course, there are some downfalls. So I wanted to hear how it's affected your practices. We can start with Rosana this time.
Me this time?
Yes.
Okay. I used it a lot. Pandemic was a very interesting time because it was, we were locked inside home, but at the same time, I had a lot of talkings with artists and writers and visual artists and filmmakers all around the world. And things that I've never really thinking about to have this opportunity. For example, I took part in a forum that we had people from Asia, from USA, from Europe, South America, working together in the same project. So for me, it was about to think in a different way to think about my work. It really opened my eyes, and it's like to open the eyes and spread the way to think. Okay, I can do this better. I carry on doing this kind of work that I was doing, but at the same time, it will be very rich if I have the opportunity to work in collaboration with the people from all around the world. So I am starting to think about new programs, new projects that I have a person, for example, in Germany and another in India and another in South America, all working together. For me, technology that was really increased. I think the use of this was increased in the pandemic. Was very good to open eyes and to think about it, to be more collaborative with other artists and other partners for my work.
That's beautiful. I think on my end, yeah, there was, I always try to see the silver lining. And so I made a lot of new connections in new ways through the pandemic. And, but it was still difficult. I mean, one thing that I'm grateful for these new connections and this sort of like via Zoom, for example, is it gave me a chance to offer a different kind of acknowledgement. As an expert in a way, like I can sort of be an expert witness in the sense that like, like even 5 years ago, people in the United States weren't really doing land acknowledgements. In the way that people in Canada and New Zealand, Aotearoa, had been doing land acknowledgements since the 90s. And so it's sort of this like trend where people do land acknowledgements more recently. And so there's just countless Zooms with land acknowledgements. And so I was, on my end, what makes Zoom possible is the history of radio wave communication and electromagnetic communication, the development of satellites and GPS, and a lot of that was pioneered by the U.S. military, and a lot of that technological advancement was made at the expense of Pacific Islanders, where the U.S. military used the Pacific to test these technologies. And so it was this kind of like a difficult thing to contend with, that this technology that was originally developed for the military during the Cold War, and then eventually becomes commercialized, is what's like holding our world together today, right? And so so I would use that as a chance to sort of talk about like a Zoom meditation, talking about our connection across the sky. Like it's not just about land. We have to acknowledge the ocean, we have to acknowledge the sky, and we have to acknowledge the histories that produced these technologies that we're surviving on today. And then I think there's, I thought my career would be over during the pandemic, but I produced more than I ever did, but then a lot of it didn't get seen. And so I sort of, kind of wish I had waited, but then I produce all this work and a lot of it doesn't get seen. And, it's a struggle because when work doesn't get seen, even when work gets seen, a major part that's missing from the artist ecosystem for artists that are not only overlooked around the world, but artists who don't have any opportunity or access for their work to be acquired, it's really difficult for us to survive and do this work. And so I think that, while the pandemic has done a lot to help lift up the rug that all of us have been swept under, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of like, okay, like how are we going to get acquired? How are we going to get connected to resources? And I know I'm not the only artist who feels that way out here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But it's incremental. Everybody's trying to do the right thing. People are doing a great job. And I'm just proud and excited to be a part of that process. And hopefully, if it doesn't happen for me, hopefully it happens for the next generation of artists.
Thank you for that. Sean, in the artist statement you submitted to accompany your work in global positioning, you mentioned that with the work, the ocean is the center of the island. You're asking the viewer to reconsider everything we know about the environment. That's a statement that really struck me. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I think that's sort of a chance to sort of reiterate this idea that like everything, like what is the environment is a question. And I love when people talk about how the outsides are insides and our insides are the outside. I love when people talk about the environment and history and space and time, like all of these sort of like conceptual frameworks. Like time is such a big one, right? Because it changes the way that we relate to our day. In the Pacific, time is sort of reversed. There's this sort of idea that the past is something that's in front of you, not behind you. Time sort of like spins around you. There are all these like ways to sort of reframe the idea of the future. Because if we think about the future, like if we think about our environment and we rethink our relationship to the environment, it becomes a way to rethink our relationship to the future. We sort of find that we're at a point now where the future is not unknown. Like we do know what the future is if we look to our past, if we reconnect to our ancestors, reconnect to their knowledge, and really use that as a way to sort of decolonize and demilitarize our environment. So it would encourage everybody to, what is the environment to them? How do they relate to the environment? How does their history and their family affect that relationship? There's like it becomes a really beautiful exercise for people to consider.
I think what you said is really beautiful about looking at the past and trying to connect it to the future. And I think that's something that applies to Rosana's work a lot as well, with your personal national identity and how that connects to the present and to the future.
Yes. In Brazil, I came from a group that all the time we think about this nature of time. We really don't believe that the time is something that is a part of us. We think more in an idea about this kind of circular time and about the influence that the ancestors have in our present day and in our future. For me, something that is quite odd to think about this idea like, okay, this is the past and this is the present, because the things that happened here are building this. It's working at this moment. So it is very difficult to think about this way, like in the Western people thinking that put the time apart, share the time. That's not like this for us. all the time when you think about the Brazilian Afro-religion, for example, it's linked. It's like it could be the same thing. I am not a religious person, but I grew up in this kind of environment that the past, the ancestors, they are all the time around you, and then all the time you can even communicate yourself with them. So that's not absolutely, that is not something apart us. And I can understand it perfectly when Sean say about this time, because I think that the experience that I myself have is like this, to this thing of time, like something circular, and all the time in the past and the present and the future, all the time, is together, it's mixing all the time.
That's very interesting. And Rosana, something that relates to looking at the past and how it informs the present and the future and the presentation of your work that I wanted to address is the use of the reference of scientific, ethnographic, botanical books in your practice. And I think that's stylistically it's very interesting, but I also think there's a deeper meaning in that. And I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit about the use of that iconography in your work.
Yes, I think that's one thing that we don't discuss in Brazil is like science, for example, built the country, and how science, the responsibility of the science and the arts in this process about Black people. So it is very, very important to bring this subject, to put it on the table and say, okay, this is not the truth. Because science was for a long time seen like something real truth, so a kind of truth that it can't be denied and it can't be challenged as well. So science says, okay, this is the thing, so you believe that. And it was largely used in Brazil, for example, to put Black people in an inferior situation, in a situation as, like primitive, like linked with nature, but linked with nature, not because we are living things, but like, okay, that's something wild. That's something that must be avoided. That's something that that's not possible to have the progress using this kind of idea. So I am very interested to think about how science made this, how science built this idea about Black people. So in order to understand this and to say that it's something wrong, I use the same images that were produced to deny to Black people, for example, something like a subjectivity, to deny to Black people the idea of humanity. So I use the same images in a way like to make this like opposite. And I don't know, in Portuguese we use an expression that's fire against fire. No, it's just the same thing to change the idea about this, because this interests me a lot. Images about science, images about nature, to show that we really had, that was not something innocent, ingenuity about, that was something that was made, that was a proposal to show that, to put Black people in a situation, in a place inside the Brazilian society.
Thank you for that. And then, speaking of images and interpretation, Sean, I think it's fascinating how you transformed an architectural, sculptural object into an image for this exhibition, and how the work evolved and transformed into a two-dimensional work for the purposes of global positioning. I would like to encourage questions from the audience at this point. We have approximately 10 minutes, and we would love to hear your voices. So please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A. I'll start with asking a question from the audience, which is what you hope that people will get from your works in global positioning.
At the very minimum, I was hoping that you know, the beautiful blue sky, the sort of like interest of the intricate lashing, and the sort of almost cryptic message, the ocean is the center of an island. I was hoping it would, at the very minimum, bring some joy to people's day. Maybe spark a little curiosity, like, oh, what is this? That was sort of at the very minimum what my hope was you know, it's been a tough 2 years, because I did consider submitting the opposite, which was going to be a giant red image of the military in Hawaii, with all the bombs and everything like that, and I thought that was important, but I also thought that we're still coming out of a time, and I wanted to focus on the future and optimism. So I decided to submit the photograph, and yeah, I think the word Hawaii is out there in the title of or in the description, and so at the very least, people get their slice of Pacific sun out there in Boston and New York and Chicago in the winter.
And Sean, how was it to see the work in person? I know you teach at Columbia University as well. How was the encounter with your work out in the wild?
Oh, it was really fun. I went on sort of a search for it, and I went on the Public Art Fund website, and I looked for the dot, and I went to one of them. It was a busy day. It was a busy bus stop, and yeah, it felt, you know how it is when you hear your own voice. It's kind of the same. I was like, oh, I hope people like it.
I told someone at a bus stop that I worked on the exhibition, and they weren't very interested in my participation in the project, but they were very interested about the artwork presented on it. Rosana, how about you, in terms of what you're hoping the audience will take away from your work?
It's just to try to make people think about. Just think about when you go to the supermarket, for example, and buy something, and don't think about nature, the things that we're buying, and how it's affecting you, and how it's affecting the environment. It's just, I mean, I was so impressed with the things that was happening in the country, in Brazil, that I had to make this kind of artwork. And I believe if people see the work and think just a minute about this, I will really be happy about the way that the project was made.
Thank you both. I would like to end on that note. We are so honored and thrilled that you have participated in Global Positioning. The exhibition will be on view through June 5th. So Rosana, we hope you make it to New York before that, and Sean, hope you get to come back. And for people in New York, Boston, or Chicago, you can access the exhibition through our website. You can see through our maps the locations where the 320 works are on view, and we encourage you to go see the works in the wild. Thank you all, and have a good evening.